Uh, Good morning, everyone, from wherever you're at. I hope you're having a nice day. We're having a nice and warm day here. I'm sitting in my front room in Northern California in Petaluma, and I just looked at the temperature outside in the back deck. It's right on 100 degrees. The plants are growing great, and we've got a lot of fruits. Is that scripture of the day, Mr. Emil mentioned. I've got a lot of fruits in my backyard. I'll tell you, if anybody wants some zucchini, just call me. And I do hope you're enjoying the Zoom meetings. You know, Zoom meetings can be fun. There's little glitches here and there sometimes, but in general, in general, we get messages across, and we enjoy each other's company, especially after services and during the chat. And I was thinking some of the blessings of the Zoom meetings. You know, we have our perks like the virtual choirs. They're really good. We get special music almost every week, and you can't beat the commute. I like the commute. I know a lot of people would identify with that. Well, last Sabbath, Mr. Kiramigian talked about the 23rd Psalm, and he brought up some characteristics of sheep. And we had special music to match, right? Didn't you love for those of you who watched it, the sheep movies? I loved them, you know, especially at the end, and it was good fun. Thank you, Mrs. Kovanis. And then Mr. Crow talked about biblical stories. And we all like stories. Well, today I've got both for you. I've got some stories on the one hand, and I got some sheep on the other hand. So hope you enjoy it. I'd like to start with a story. Some time ago, not very long ago, last year or so, we had a big tree. It was right on our property line, and it fell over into our driveway from our neighbor's property, blocking our driveway. And I thought, well, I could probably cut that down and save the money. I mean, chop it up. It was in the driveway. Chop it up and haul it off, and it'd take me a day and a half, maybe 2 days, something like that. But it ended up, we got a local tree service company to come over. It's a family company. I've used them before many times. We've got trees around there, always falling over. We need something done. But they're dependable and they're diligent. They really get in there and work together. They cut that tree up. Not only did they cut it up, but they run it through their chomper and turned it into chips so I could put it out in the backyard. And the whole thing, I'm thinking the process took between an hour and 2 hours. It was quick. And it was impressive to watch how they all work. They were workers, they're diligent, and they work together. You know, along these lines, I have something I hope will benefit us all today, and especially the younger. We can all work along with God, and similar to families working together, because actually we're part of one big spiritual family, right? I'd like to start out with an interesting word. It's familiar to many of you. Some of you, it may be a new word, but I'm going to share my screen. If I can share my screen. I'm still working at the technology. There you go. It's called synergy. Now, Webster's dictionary says it's an interaction or cooperation of two or more organizations, substances, or other agents to produce a combined effect greater than the sum of their separate effects. In other words, it's getting more bang for your buck. Synergy is like a frequent flyer upgrade. You know, you use the airline credit card and you get double miles. That tree removal company I was talking about, tree removal family company, worked together. Each one had their individual position and their individual responsibilities, and they did a tremendous job. They synergize. There's two generally overlooked factors in the Bible that provide tremendous synergy when they're combined effectively. And they can even change the course of your life. And that's what I'd like to talk about today. Specifically, we're going to examine a few scriptures and examples of the character trait of diligence and consider its effect when coupled with the inspiration of God. The title of my message is The Synergy of Diligence and Inspiration. Let's take a look at that word diligence first. The Webster defines it as constant, careful effort, perseverance. Inspiration, we know as what Webster defines it, it's a divine influence upon human beings. It's God being involved in our lives in one way or another. Back with you here. Proverbs 10:4 says, "A slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich." Diligence is powerful. It produces prosperity. Proverbs 12:24, I'll just read it to you. It says, "The hand of the diligent will rule, while the slothful will be put to forced labor." Consider a biblical example. If you could think of one, think of an example of someone who was diligent who ended up being a ruler. We could actually talk about a couple of them, but what I'd like to talk about today is the story of Joseph. A biblical story. Maybe you could turn over with me to Genesis 37. For some of you, this may be a very familiar story. And for others, it may be relatively new. It depends on how long you've been reading the Bible, but it's worth a careful read. We're only going to hit some highlights today in order to get across the message I have for you. But it's worth a careful read, maybe later in the Sabbath. So Genesis 37 verse 2 starts the story. "These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old," quite young when the story starts, "was pasturing in the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father." Okay, whatever we're not privileged there to understand what they did, but he just brought a bad report of them. Go down to verse 12. "Now, his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, 'Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them.' And he said to them, 'Here I am.'" He's all set and ready to go. Okay? I'm going to go back. Pause with share here. He was a shepherd, okay? And I think sheep are absolutely fascinating animals. The sheep, I hope you can see them there, they look like they're asking me, what's going on? They want to talk with me or something. But Joseph was diligent. And being diligent, he probably shepherded a lot of sheep, and I could see his family business as it grows. It could have, they would just continually to have more and more sheep and more work. But Joseph's brothers were jealous of him, and they wanted to get rid of him, kill him. I'm just going to go over the highlights of the story. They threw him into a pit until they could figure out what to do with him, and Judah wanted to save him. But go down to verse 26. Once he's in the pit, they're going to have to figure out what they can do with him. So verse 26, chapter 37. "Then Judah said to his brothers, 'What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not let our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. That's something, it's brothers, some of them wanted to kill him, but Judah stood up for him there. And his brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up, lifted him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. Now, could you imagine? Joseph was a wealthy young fellow, I think they're a very prosperous family. And this guy ends up in chains going to Egypt. It's not right. Have you ever had something that just isn't right in your life? I think we all have. It's unjust. And then when he gets to Egypt, he gets sold, and he ends up being a household servant. I guess it would be better than working on a chain gang someplace, but I think of Joseph and his family as very prosperous people, and he ends up where he is. But he must have been diligent. If you go read the details of the story, because Potiphar, his owner, had complete confidence in him. And whenever Potiphar left, he put Joseph in charge of his household. He had complete confidence with him, even regarding his wife. But you read the story, his wife was chasing Joseph. She had ideas, and go down to chapter 39, verse 11. She had made multiple advances to him, but he didn't want to have anything to do with Potiphar, Potiphar's wife. Genesis 39, verse 11. But one day, when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was there in the house, she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. And I think this inspiration of God saved him. Okay, he was quite diligent, but he had a little help, and he knew right from wrong, and he avoided the situation. But what happened to him? The poor guy gets thrown in prison for that. But this story of Joseph is interesting because it repeats itself. One bad thing will happen, and then he'll rise through it, and then another seemingly bad thing will happen. He gets thrown into prison, but he does really well with the guard and the keeper of the prison, and he rises to a position of prominence. In Genesis 39, verse 21, 39:21, it says, "But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed." I think, it mentions, of course, God was with him and gave him favor in the sight of the prison master, but he must have been diligent, because you wouldn't put someone in charge of your prison or whatever business you have unless he really did a good job. Those are the people who get good jobs, the people who are diligent. Okay, go to Genesis 40, verse 1. We're going to read a little bit of what had happened to him, Joseph, when he was in the prison. The story goes on. Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker committed an offense against their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison where Joseph was confined. Now, it wouldn't surprise me if they didn't do much offensive at all, because some of these kings, you wouldn't know what they were going to do to people. Oftentimes, they're very fickle in whatever they decided to do with people. But going on, the captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with him, and he attended him. They continued for some time in custody, and one night they both dreamed, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, each his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. This is a chance meeting there, or a divine meeting, rather, of these two and Joseph. So when Joseph came in to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody of his master's house, "Why are your faces downcast today?" And they said to him, "We've had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." And Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God?" Inspiration, right? God is the one who interprets dreams, and Joseph correctly pointed that out. "Please tell them to me." So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, "In my dream there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." So we don't know what that meant, but Joseph said to him, "This is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as formerly, when you were his cupbearer. Only remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness, mention me to Pharaoh, so get me out of this house." I could see I want to do that too, load the dice in my favor, ask him, maybe I can get out of this place. I think if you read the rest of the story there in chapter 40, the baker's dream didn't turn out quite as well. So go to Genesis 41, next chapter, in verse 1. Genesis 41:1. It says, "After 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile." He had a dream, and who can interpret dreams? Okay, so the stage is set. It's quite a wonderful story. Go down to verse 8. "So in the morning his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. Pharaoh told him his dreams, but there was none who could interpret them to Pharaoh. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, 'I remember my offenses today, when Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard. We dreamed on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with its own interpretation. A young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When I told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker hanged.'" And that must have been fantastic as far as the Pharaoh was concerned, because we know that his dreams were quite fantastic themselves, and I'd want to know what they meant too. So in Genesis 41:14, it says, "Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. And when he had shaved himself, changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh." So enter inspiration. He was a worker, he was diligent, but nothing compared to the inspiration of God, the synergy of those 2 factors working together. Inspiration rose Joseph exponentially. Imagine, it's similar to getting invited to the White House right now. If somebody came and knocked on your door and said, "The president wants to see you," and you get flown over to the White House. It normally doesn't happen, and it normally doesn't happen with people in prison. This is something very special. So that was a nice story, right? And we have the end of the story. He lives happily ever after. Actually, it's not quite the end of the story. Allow me to pose a question to you. How about put yourself in Joseph's place? And let's say the king said to you, okay, you're this wise person, I'll put you in charge. You know that there's going to be 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. I'm going to put you in charge. Imagine, how would you store up grain for 7 years for a whole country? Ask God for inspiration, of course. That's what I would do. The first thing I'd do, I'd ask God for inspiration. I bet he received it. In fact, you could start maybe small with a silo bin. If you notice this silo, it's steel, and it is designed in a special way to take the loads of the grain inside it. The loads are sizable. This is just a small grain bin. How did he store up grain for 7 years for the whole country to last 7 years? He might have started small like this and then maybe went a little bit bigger, and maybe, who knows, maybe God inspired him to create a few machines to help him. We don't know exactly, but we do know it turned out very well. It turned out very well for Joseph and the Egyptians. God certainly was with Joseph, and the rest is history. You know, diligence was part of Joseph's character. He got into his work, whatever it was, and kept going. You know, diligence is powerful, inspiration is powerful, but the combination leads to awesome success. Let's take a look at a New Testament example, the Apostle Paul. If you could turn with me over to 2 Corinthians. This is a little different note, but it's very similar in that there's a combination of diligence and inspiration. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 24. We just read a little bit here. Remember, Paul was somebody very special, chosen by God. 2 Corinthians 11:24, he's talking about some of what he had to go through. 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes less one. I can imagine how much he must have had scars on his back. I would not like to have 40 lashes less one just one time. But he kept going. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I was adrift at sea, on frequent journeys and dangers from rivers, danger from robbers, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea. This guy saw a lot. Danger from false brothers, in toil and hardship, through many sleepless nights, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. He was diligent. He kept going. That's what we need to be about. People, that needs to be in our character. He says, and apart from other things, there's the daily pressure of me on my anxiety for all the churches. You know, we're having some of that right now, right? You know, with where we meet, and you know, with the what are we going to do for the Feast of Tabernacles? And you'll hear a little bit more about that later today. Was he diligent? Yeah, he kept going back up. That's diligence. Over in Philippians 3 through 6, I'll just mention it. He must have been a very educated Pharisee, or a Jew. Paul studied under Gamaliel. He was a noted Jewish teacher of the time. He's a renowned teacher. Well, you probably have heard, some of you have heard this, I've heard this, and I can identify with it, as some of you out there can, that it takes about 10,000 hours on average time to get good at a profession. So Paul must have been a worker. Before we read of all these things that happened to him, he must have been a real worker to be as educated and knowledgeable as he was. In fact, he was, in the book of Acts, I think it mentions how a ruler said that he thought that Paul's education was driving him mad. He was very educated. Was he inspired? He got knocked down and blinded for a start, just for a start. But what we take for the inspired word, I wanted to say for granted, is not, it is given to us. The message from God, the Bible, the New Testament, the letters, Paul wrote them. Inspiration. God worked through him to produce the New Testament. Because of Paul's diligence, we have all his letters in this wonderful book to use today. Diligence is powerful, inspiration is powerful, but the combination, the synergistic effect, leads to awesome results, awesome success. Consider, if you turn over to John with me, turn over to John chapter 5. Jesus himself, when you think of Jesus, if you ask the question, was he diligent? He started the New Testament church. What we have today is started by Jesus. He worked miracles. And then he followed through with the ultimate test. He actually gave his life for us. But was he inspired? Let's see what the Bible says. John 5, verse 19 and 20. So Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, the Son can do nothing of his own accord, but only what he sees the Father doing. For whatever the Father does, that the Son does. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all that he himself is doing. And greater works than these he will show him, so that you may marvel." He kept focused on his job. He had work to do, but there was the contact with God that we want to aim for. We want to aim for and have depend on the inspiration from God, the contact with our Creator. Diligence is powerful, inspiration is powerful, but the combination leads to awesome success. So how about us? You and me, and we think sometimes that, the accomplishments of some people, but there's work to do in your own life. When I think about just putting messages together and special music together, it takes time and effort, and all the choir gets together and there's effort. But I think the best part, when all of us watching, I enjoy watching services so much, because of inspiration from God. God knows what we need. God inspires people for the good of his church. It's our family. Whatever work you have in front of you, make sure God's on your side. You may be trying to pay this month's rent. I've been in that position, trying to make enough money to pay rent for a month. That's work. Be diligent. Do everything you can do, but aim for God's inspiration. You may be finishing your college degree. Sometimes things happen to people. Illness happens, and difficulties happen. And sometimes finishing a degree can seem like it just takes forever. But diligence and inspiration will get you there. Getting past the next medical exam somehow. We've all had some type of health problem. Saving your marriage. There's work. Things you can do to be diligent and do the best you can, but you aim towards having God's inspiration. Whatever your hand sets to do, aim for God's inspiration. Be sure to be diligent. Even preaching the gospel, and preparing the people, that's our motto. United Church, God, anything you can do to help out. Whenever we drift from God, it's best to fix that relationship before going on to anything else, because we do want God's inspiration. In conclusion, in a nutshell, diligent is a character trait we need for the work God has for each of us, and inspiration, likewise, is what we need. I'm going to share one last slide with you here. As you go about your life, Be diligent to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, but combine that with God's inspiration, and you'll achieve awesome success. With that, I'll pass it back over to our song leader.